So, how hard is it to talk into a camera and a microphone for a long time? Like, well, back in the day when I was a kid watching esports, I say a kid, teenager, really, I'm being realistic. I thought, oh, it can't be difficult at all. So, I tried just in my bedroom watching something on my laptop, tried casting, and it took about 5 seconds probably before I ran out of the words to say. So, I don't know how I ended up writing. But nonetheless, this episode is trying to help you watching this get into casting, and obviously I'm not cut out for it. So we brought in Launders, someone with much more experience than me and a lot more talent than me in that area. One thing I find with casting now that I'm quite aware of how the industry works is like not a path to pro in like any game whatsoever. It seems to be some people get plucked out by like existing talent and nurtured over time doing online broadcasts and smaller tournaments leading up to the big ones. So looking back, like what are the key things when you look back now that you think that led to your success as you were growing and trying to make it pro?
Well, I think there's one thing that's common for anybody who's trying to get recognized or get jobs in almost any field that has to do with entertainment or sports or anything like that. And that's like you can pivot from almost anywhere if you get famous doing something else. So, like for me, I did YouTube. I post a lot of videos to Reddit. I got some notoriety that way. I got a following on Twitter. And as a caster, I didn't have any natural inclination to become a caster. One of my friends just said, "Hey, you have a good voice. You should try casting." And the thought of it was just, I just was, I was like, "No, I don't want to do this." Like, I liked playing, I like analyzing, do movement videos, but it wasn't my thing. But he was like, "If you want to become more a part of the CS:GO scene, esports is blowing up." So the opportunity, I think, was a big one. Just recognizing it and already having a platform.
Hmm.
Those two things kind of led me into casting and also helped me have leverage as a caster.
Right. And so when you like for the first time gave it a go, did you find that already having the YouTube experience, where obviously you've spoken for a long time and got quite comfortable, being able to just speak fluently and clearly, was that a massive boon to your success, like pivoting over?
Not at all. And I think that
All right.
a lot of people find out that you're basically every time you try something new, even if they're somewhat related, you're going to have a different level of nervousness coming into it. Like at this point, when I went out to cast the last fall final in front of like 12,000, Danish crowd, huge crowd, biggest crowd I've ever been in, I didn't have an ounce of nervousness. I was totally comfortable. I'd already done a few stadiums at this point. Casting is my bread and butter. I had no problem with it whatsoever. But then we did, like a podcast, a live podcast that was more intimate in front of like 30 people. And it felt like a brand new challenge. Like I just suddenly, the nerves are there a little bit. Still wasn't that nervous, having had some experience, but the fact that I was looking into people's eyes and talking to them directly made me realize, like, yeah, each of these different things, require their own level of experience. And I know a lot of casters that if you put them in front of a camera to do a YouTube video, suddenly they're nervous. They're not sitting there talking to
Right.
somebody to help them through a broadcast. So each of these skills, there might be some overlap on like that Venn diagram, but ultimately they require their own sets of experiences, I think.
Okay, and how long did it take for you to get to the point where you were really comfortable in yourself when you started casting and when it was suggested to you that you could try it?
It was probably like 5 years, I think, before I
Bloody
felt
hell!
like yeah, I think before then I would lie to myself and be like, "Yeah, I'm not nervous." But then I'd listen to the cast and be like, "Man, I'm speaking really high pitched right now. I'm using a lot of idioms. I'm doing a lot of the castery things." And I realized like I'm not myself. And so the truth was that I wasn't as confident as I believed. And eventually it came. And I think in life as well, being a more confident person and getting used to going to events and meeting like 50 new people at once, and then you know getting to a bigger event stage and getting used to that again. I think I started to build up some confidence both as a caster and just as a person, and both those things folded into each other to the
Hmm.
point that I wasn't nervous anymore. But yeah, that half a decade, I'm gonna say.
Bloody hell, that's quite a while to be like doubting yourself a bit and lying to yourself.
Yeah.
But it also it takes a lot to stick with something for that long, even if especially if you're not quite feeling it or you feel like you're not quite made for it or whatever. But like so as we say, is not like a clear pipeline from like starting out to getting to a point where you're getting paid for it and maybe sustaining yourself. So would you say there are probably so many like amazing casters say in CS:GO that just that one just never discovered, and thus like there's so much wasted potential there. And if so, like what do you think are the main things casters can do to kind of stand out and maybe start grabbing some events?
Yeah, well, at first, I firmly believe that like I've become a good caster because there are so many good talent in CS:GO. So a
Yes.
lot of us watch many esports. I mean, nothing stops us from watching that NFL, football, whatever it is, and esports and all these games and taking from different commentators. But
Hmm.
just working alongside, people like Henry Sato, even Scrawny being as good of a caster as he is, and all these other people is just rubbed off. So I think we make each other a lot better. Um, Sorry, what was the original question?
Oh, well, so like, well, I was just saying, like, there's surely a lot of potentially great casters that were just never discovered because there's not this clear pipeline. And then
Oh yeah.
also what like newcomers and or up and comers can do to like I guess separate themselves from the pack or at least get discovered. You know.
Yeah, sure. So the way forward for me at the beginning was I actually reached out to Sadokist for he was looking for a caster on ESEA to cast a local LAN event in Montreal called LAN ETS. It was run of this electronic school in a technical school in Montreal, and I made like a private YouTube video with me casting like half of a game, and then I sent it over to him and I was like, "Can I come cast with you?" And he's like, "Well, you're a terrible caster, but you have a great voice. So, okay, I'll give you a shot." And it's like a free event. So I got in a mega bus, which costs $1 in Canada, to go to Montreal. And then, brought like slept in the school, casted the thing with him. And then someone from SIVO, which was one of the leagues from a long time ago, if you remember, reached out and they were like, "Hey, we saw you casting. We want to know if you want to come cast SIVO." And during all this time, like I didn't really get better as a caster. The only thing I had done was showed people that I was willing to do it and that I've been a bit better. And I think that is the key. I think that is the key ultimately is just put yourself in as many places as possible. I think every caster has heard this that you should grab the open GoT VIPs, that you should go and try to cast like the RMRs are coming up and there's going to be games that aren't casted. So go ahead and cast those and try to build a small following on Twitch. And it's about placing as many small bets with your time as you possibly can. I think money isn't going to get you anywhere in terms of leveraging opportunities, but you can make the YouTube channel for free. You can post videos on Reddit. Scrawny did his knife round that he casted on Reddit, and then that got him some notoriety. You can do pretty much anything, and that'll just show people that you're around. And then eventually, you'll maybe get an opportunity. Like for example, Mally Snake's a good person to point to because he's a good analyst, premier player, had the makings of working as broadcast talent, but hadn't done any really. And then I think because I knew him from YouTube, seeing him do videos with Thorin and stuff like that, Summit asked me to if there were any NA talent available to come and do the CS Summit. I said, well, yeah, pick up Maui. There's no one else in America. I think I listed Dust, Maui, Darth Mike, and there's not that many other people. Even if I'm to list all of them. So just the simple fact that he had made taken the initiative to do YouTube content and show what he can do, confident analysis, that kind of thing. That was it.
Hmm.
And then, Summit gave him a job there. And then he was doing Flashpoint and now he's doing Pro League. And it's just been a blur. Like people can't even point to the point where Maui started, but it was really because he was just a name that was on people's mind at the moment that another commentator was asked to give a recommendation.
Right, so about shooting your shot, I think that that goes for many career paths. So it's good that no matter what, like you're gonna have more chance to pick up an opportunity. You create your own luck with putting yourself out there, right? So it's about not being afraid of annoying people by messaging them and flooding Reddits and everything, like. And I think you can tell the people that are really dying to, have like to get their shot and their opportunity to get going. And someone I see a lot at the moment who is seemingly quote unquote working on their craft, even though they kind of made it. It's like Spaceman who does amateur Call of Duty, I think, like the COD Challengers and some RLCS stuff. And basically, after every like cast, I've noticed, even if I think he's a good, really good at his job, he'll tweet like, oh, "I could have done a lot better there. I'll go back VOD review." And we'll come back better for the next one. He's like very
Mm.
critical of himself at all times. Is that Do you do that as well? Do you go back and look at the matches you've casted and really analyze how you said things, or maybe there's a little gap or filler words and stuff? Are you really repetitive on
Yeah,
reviewing what you've done?
I think you have to strike a balance where you are you're a little bit neurotic. You look at everything you do, but you have to maintain confidence, like I said. And I think if you do the VOD review way too much, then you might have just created like a huge laundry list of things you need to fix and like no concept of where to start. You one, two, or three things at a time. You go into the next cast, you get better, you build brick by brick. But I think you have to ride a balance. And I think even, a very ambitious caster who the intentions are really good and they really just want to be the best, it makes sense that they are going to be like really hard on themselves and try to pick up on everything. But I think you're a person, and I think that needs to be respected, and you can only do so much. And so I think it's again important to just pick your battles and try
Hmm.
to build slowly over time. And I think sometimes when a caster expresses themselves on Twitter, it's to show people that they are trying, because a lot of us are our biggest critics. And when we're commentating, we have to let mistakes go all the time. So we don't often get to show people, when we said something we knew was wrong, we don't take the extra few seconds afterwards to correct ourselves, because that actually just ruins the broadcast. So
Yeah.
maybe on Twitter later, we're like, okay, yeah, I recognize like I kind of messed up here. I took a little bit too much time analyzing this point. I was really repetitive. I laughed at something I shouldn't have. I'm just going to address that afterwards on Twitter. And yeah, it is usually them harboring a lot of pain and just wanting to express it a little bit. But I do the same thing. All casters do the same thing, at least the ones that are trying, which I hope is all of them. And yeah, it's pretty painful in that regard. Like everything, just the moments keep. I mean, it's just like playing. You whiff a shot, or you got lazy for a second. You didn't sleep well the night before because you were pugging too late. You come into a match, you don't play your best. You don't really get to complain about it that much, but you recognize the mistakes you made. And then every YouTuber like me is going to go and make a YouTube video, unlucky or bad, and show you like 15 things you did wrong. And you have the whole list of excuses for why that match didn't go the way you wanted to, but you didn't get to talk about it.
So it's good to be critical and reflective on your work, but avoid like analysis paralysis, where you literally break down and dissect everything you do to the point where it's kind of like, oh shit, maybe I'm actually not built for this. Like if I'm getting all of these things wrong, maybe like I mean, you can always be too harsh on yourself. And as you said before, so you got a comment where you had a great voice, but you were a terrible caster. I think I've quoted that
Yeah, it
verbatim.
was Matt. Yeah, he said
So,
that.
so like, what what exactly makes a great caster? Then is it a bit obviously of having a voice that people like? It helps, but obviously there's a lot
Mhm.
more that goes into that. I can't imagine it's just having the most extensive vocabulary either. There's a lot that goes into that stuff.
Yeah, no, I actually think that's something that's actually a really important thing to talk about right now, because
Okay.
we can point to a lot of our favorite casters, and you don't have to use a dictionary to listen to a cast and listen to a great cast. You know the words they're saying.
Hmm.
It's in fact like for me, the memory recall that's more important than expanding the vocabulary. So take something like James Bardolph, for example. He uses actually a really simple vocabulary. Matt might use the odd word here or there where you're like, damn, haven't heard that one used in a sentence live. That's pretty cool. I'll look that up. That's awesome. But you listen to James Bardolph, I mean, he uses the most simple vocabulary ever, but at the same time sounds way more unique than almost anybody else on the mic, like easily. Like the idioms he uses, he's got a lot of variety in them and stuff like that, but it's mostly the combinations of the words. And so I think it really is just about your mastery over your current vocabulary rather than expanding that vocabulary. And I think that's where a lot of casters kind of go on the wrong path, where they start to play the thesaurus game or try to expand, and then it sounds awkward because they're using words they're not comfortable with. And maybe eventually they reach like a consolidation point where they've got a strong vocabulary that's very far reaching and everything like that. But ultimately, I think 90% of the work should be done within the range that you already have, as opposed to trying to expand it.
Interesting. Okay. Like I would have. I thought it would be somewhere in between there, but so that's interesting to know. And I'm trying to think of casters that I think have got terrible voices, and I and I can't actually think of any. So I feel like you may have to be a little bit like blessed in the voice department by
I think so.
whatever the creator is to even have that as a starting point. So
Yeah,
some
I mean,
people they may be actually great at describing what's going on, or like talking about the higher level of the match going on. But if their voice is the equivalent of like nails on a chalkboard, it's probably not going to translate too well.
yeah. I mean, a model should be pretty. It's kind of the same thing except for voice, and for broadcasts, audio is more important than video, because you can turn your eyes to your second monitor, but you can't turn your ears off without muting everything at once. So it's really important to not sound offensive, like in terms of just got to be easier to listen to. And like there was a guy I gave feedback to on Reddit who's looking for feedback as a commentator, and he had like a bit of a lisp. And I said, hey, listen, like this doesn't sound great, and the rest of the commentary, there's stuff that you can fix from a technical perspective, but this also doesn't sound great. And ultimately, it will boil down to that sometimes. And take someone like Anders, for example. He is Danish, but for people who don't know who Anders is and they listen to commentary from 2014 to 2015, they wouldn't have even known he was Danish. This guy almost sounds British, like a little bit. And he did put in work to try to remove some of the Danish accent, even though, he speaks fluent Danish, he lives in Denmark. This is all directed by him. And you could live in a world where you're like, well, no, people got to love me for who I am, and I'm going to be exactly who I am all the time. And you can, and there's nothing that's going to, there's no reason that you shouldn't do that if that's really important to you. But ultimately, Anders recognized that, what's a really popular accent? It's like the UK accent, okay, or just sounding like an American commentator. These are kind of the two biggest places where commentators come from. So leading in that direction is probably going to be a bit more popular. And I think there's a lot of countries where people speak English as a second language where they're not even a fan of their own accent when it comes to speaking English. And so ultimately,
Right.
when you're talking about a broadcast with a million people, maybe you do want to think about that. Maybe that's also as important as your game knowledge, your presentation, the way you look, all these things.
That makes sense, and I want to kind of switch gears a bit because I don't see like this topic discussed too much, but there's obviously a lot of work that you need to do before going into an event, right? You have to do all of your research and such to make sure you know. I don't know if there's a big transfer window in a game or something. Well, you need to know where everyone's gone and their history and how they're performing and I guess the kind of form they're in and everything, right? So how much work, if you can even quantify that, do you put in prior to even getting on a plane and going to the stadium or over to cast?
Honestly, so this is what the half the reason I do YouTube. So I actually practice my narratives, my storylines. I do the analysis in the YouTube videos. And when I come into casts, I'm using a lot of things that I've already seen or talked about in my
Mm,
YouTube videos. So that's the way that I actually practice. And I always tell people this too, that, some of us do really well in terms of the money we make and the opportunities we have and stuff like that. And I think some people have this kind of imposter syndrome when it comes to their work because they have some like one natural gift and then they're kind of slacking in some other areas, or it's like genuinely the syndrome, and they shouldn't feel like that. But ultimately, I tell people like you part of the reason you're getting paid so much is because like I just crossed 10,000 hours of Counter Strike. Okay, if you put 10,000 hours into any other field, you would get a lot of money for that time,
mhm,
especially if you're using that time to like learn really hard. And so ultimately a lot of what I'm getting paid for is the stuff that I already know. And like you're saying, keeping on top of really important news topics, roster transfers, slight meta changes, and stuff like that. That stuff you have to do. And for me, I do that, and then I monetize it. So
mhm.
all my preparation is really out there, and I don't build out stat sheets. My preparation for a desk, however, is different from my preparation from a cast. For my
Okay.
cat in a cast, I'm preparing a lot more in the narrative department because I think that's probably the single most important thing to get people eyes glued, interested, invested in the games, appreciative of why it matters that these character models are actually going ahead and trying to win rounds versus each other because there's people behind them with emotions and stories. Like that's the most important part. And that's the one big barrier between us and sports where you can see a live reaction, sweat coming off people's faces and like physical contact and stuff like that. I think in bridging the gap from esports to sports in that way, which is really important, we should be really trying to hammer home, how much this match means to a player coming into it and what the real life was like before this, the team they just came from, comments between players and teams about each other. And that's where most of my preparation comes in for a cast. When it comes to an analyst desk, I will bust out the stat sheets to remember vetoes. I will make sure to understand like a ton about specific plays people make on certain maps, and I'll try to make sure that everything is incredibly specific in that regard. But when I'm on the cast, I respect the role, and when I have a desk that I respect, I just use that desk to listen, and I tie the desk into what I say in the broadcast, and specifically don't use my own points so that the entire broadcast is enriched. And that's not just me doing that with the desk. The desk does that with the cast. Scrawny does that with the desk. We all make sure we are working together in that way.
And just on a personal note, which do you prefer, like casting or the more desk work?
It's got to be casting for sure. And I think naturally, I think I would be on the desk. Casting was really hard for me, and from a technical perspective. I didn't realize how much I had to do correctly to get it right. And to be 100% real, casting is more important than the analyst desk. The analyst desk holds, keeps the viewers in the stream in between matches, but and ultimately enriches the broadcast for sure. But the game itself is the most important part about the broadcast, and everything else is complementary to that. But with that comes a lot more pressure for the casters and also a lot more
Hmm.
criticism, which is definitely warranted. You have to be very good and on point for 40 minutes to an hour at a time. You can't mess anything up. Everything you say is live, and there's lot more repercussions to the things that you say in that broadcast, and will be remembered more than when I go and do a desk. Um, so I think that pressure, I really like it, and I also think it's really fun, and it's really nice to be a part of that live moment. I couldn't be a
Hmm.
pro player, so at least I get to be a part of those live moments that make those pro players great. I think that's the second best thing.
And touching on the hate a little bit, I mean, like it's the same with any kind of content related endeavor or anything where you put yourself out there. You're bound to get people who don't like what you do and don't like what you put out there into the world, right? So, like, how do you go about dealing with that, or do you just ignore it even exists? Because I know, like Thorin, when he's doing his by the numbers with Rich or whatever, he just won't look at Twitch chat, for example.
Yeah.
Like he doesn't want to see any of that. So, like, how do you go about navigating that? Obviously, it's unfortunately it's part of the job, right? So how do you navigate that?
It's part of the job, and people are allowed to talk, and I have my own opinions too, and I think everyone needs to have respect for the fact that uh you know both the peanut gallery, the players in the field, and also the casters who are calling the action, everybody gets to talk about whatever they want. Okay. And
Hmm.
so I don't want to get too pressed about somebody making a comment on Reddit, as just like if I go and make a comment about a pro player, their fans shouldn't be too pressed. And honestly, if they do get pressed, I don't have to get pressed about them getting pressed. And I think that's really important. That creates just like a healthier ecosystem, and just the understanding that people are just going to say things. I mean, this is the world we live in. And honestly, when you read comments that make you feel like you're not a person anymore, like that person said that and didn't think that you'd read it, I mean, that just goes to show you how many levels of separation that person feels like they are away from you, right? If they were right beside you, that comment would be different. And so in one sense, that's kind of cool. I mean, that shows you how big the game is. That shows you how much bigger it is than you in the first place. And that's really important. And I just feel like people should be allowed to talk about me as a commentator. I have the choice of whether or not I want to read the criticism. And I've
Yeah.
made Scrawny do this, and I've done this where I don't read anything. We don't read positive threads or negative threads about ourselves on Reddit. Okay, they go up, they happen. People have conversations like they're allowed to. We don't take part of them, and we don't go too high, and we don't go too low. And I think that also has contributed to me becoming more confident as a person and personality. I mean, I have my own YouTube channel. I have my own Twitter where people will tweet at me and stuff like that. And I mean, I don't think I get as much hate as maybe some other people, and everyone goes through waves of
Yeah.
the people going against them. And people like Thorin are super controversial, and they know it. They kind of live in the animosity zone. They realize that that's just a part of the game for them. And so I actually might be more sensitive to hate than Thorin, but Thorin gets like 100 times more. So then he responds to it. I just have kind of insulated myself from it by not really reading that much. But I realized one thing that was really important, and nobody's going to be harder on myself than I am. And as soon as I realized that, I also realized that if I go into a thread, that I am actually going in with the intention to look for things to kind of big me up. And I think that when I realized that, I would go into a positive thread about myself and get all the way to the bottom. But I know the last 10% of those comments are going to be negative, even in a positive thread about me. And those 10% of comments are going to ruin the whole thread for me, that
Hmm.
I was looking for them the entire time, like secretly. So once I came to that realization, I kind of stopped doing that. And I think that was for the best. And when, for me, eh, the moment you realize you're not cut out for the job is the moment that you actually don't know how to improve anymore by yourself. There's so many things that we don't do that well that we could do better, that we could improve upon, that we know before people tweeted at us that we did incorrectly, that you can fix. We don't need that extra criticism, I think, for the most part, to try to get better.
Yeah, you require some like brutal honesty, like inwardly, to as well though, because some people may think they are doing a spectacular job, but are unwilling to actually look inward and be honest with themselves, and own up to the fact, and they will just go seek out the positive reinforcements, and then you create a monster that way, and I don't think it's going to go too well for you going forward. So what you say is important, and I think very valuable. And one thing I wanted to touch on actually is, why do you think like CS:GO has such a depth in talent and breadth in talent? Like, it seems really competitive
Yeah.
in terms of getting jobs and stuff, and basically everyone who even works from like a tier 2 event upwards is like really on top of their game. So why do you think CS:GO in particular has that kind of dynamic between broadcast talent?
Yeah, it's kind of like, I mean, let's look at the CIS for operas. Like let's take, we got Simple, and then we have Shiro, and then we have like, we go down to like 10 operas, and they're like all better than our best NA opera. And I think that really it's just the whetstone that helps the entire region grow. And I think the same thing is can be said for casters, where we have so many good talent that maybe we got fortunate with at the beginning at the top, between like Anders Sedokis, Henry, Moses, Semler, all these guys that you basically had to get way farther than you thought you could just to be competitive with them. And that just made everybody better. And now there's also, because the standard is so high, you just naturally improve. I mean, you just learn so much more quickly. And I think that's the 100% the reason why all talent are so much better, is because the first guys were so good. I mean, James and DDK, there were so many different flavors, all working at such a high level and doing such an excellent job that you had no choice but to both learn to be good and also be forced to even be considered to get a job at any level. And then from there, all the other talents are helping each other get better, and then they cast with different people and people learn. So yeah, I think it might have been a little bit of luck at first. I don't know how we
Mm.
found so many good talent in the beginning, but I think that that's why the rest of the talent have gotten so much better.
So does like such a level of competition not breed like any, I don't want to say animosity, but like real competitive nature between the casters for getting certain events? Because I'm not sure if it happens in CS too much, but there are I guess examples of undercutting that goes on in
Mm.
casting and broadcasts, right?
Yeah, I've heard about it. I don't think I've ever personally like not gotten something because I got undercut, but I know it's happened. I just
Hmm.
have noticed that's happened a lot more at lower levels, and I've heard stories from the past that it's been an issue. But I mean, there is caster drama almost every single event. Like it's pretty entertaining. Like it's really great. But I think that uh, at the same time, we are civil. I mean, we recognize that we're all technically competing for jobs, but for the most part, we're also really great friends. And when we go into events, I mean, we don't have any hand in who gets hired or not. I really don't know if anybody's doing stuff like that. I genuinely don't. So I don't know if that's a thing. But from our perspective, the TOs pick who casts the finals for the most part. We we put ourselves out there. Hopefully, we get hired for events, and then we have certain TOs that will have worked with us for so long. We continue to get events like that, but we're not against other casters coming in to cast those events with us. In fact, we try to mix as much as possible. We really don't want to be separated between like ESL and Blast, and really
Hmm.
look forward to the times where we get to all be in an event together. So I think on the surface, there's definitely like tons of drama, and there's probably undercutting, and there's all of these other issues. And then on the other hand, there's also a lot of great friendship. And I seriously, I mean, there's some times where you go to an event, you're like, man, I just this one person, I hope they don't ruin the green room. But for the most part, that's pretty blessed. Like 1 out of 10 people or something like that is one person you don't look forward to. That's a pretty
Hmm.
great crew, and I think that's more that you could ask for in basically any other job. I mean, any job. There's a guy at the office you don't want to see, right?
Yeah, I think as well as like the people who work in CS:GO really love and care for CS:GO as well, so they want the best for the broadcast and the tournaments and stuff, right? Which is not necessarily the case in every esport. There's not too
Mm,
many transferables between. Like, there's not, you won't go, you don't see many casters just jump between CS and Valorant all of the time. They tend to like stick to it or move on, right? And we'll get to it. I want to speak a little bit on the Valorant caster situation, and obviously
mm,
we won't see him with Sean Gares and stuff going to 100 Thieves in a little bit. But what actually, we could probably get to that now thinking about it, because obviously there's no pipeline leading up to casting, but then afterwards there's not really a clear definition of where you can go.
Hmm.
they're either, right? So when you feel like you've done what you need to do, say like Henry G, for example, where he's like, okay, I've completed it, mate. Like, what's next? Like, as the world's kind of your oyster. We do see a lot of people go to obviously becoming a general manager or a coach or an analyst, but like, how do you feel about that? What can be changed or improved there? Maybe at the tournament organizers to better accommodate the people that have worked so hard and done great work for them over the years.
Yeah, I mean the Sean and DDK thing is just made me like really. I actually had a dream about how mad I was that that happened. I'm
Okay,
not even kidding.
okay.
That they retired. I mean, it's just so ridiculous. They're the two clear best talent in Valorant. Like,
Hmm.
Pansy's up there. All the XCS guys. You know what I mean? Like really,
Shocker.
uh, yeah, holding the baton. But they're so insanely good, and that circuit barely makes sense to me from that perspective. I mean, I don't know. I think another reason why it's competitive, but at the same time it's healthier in CS:GO is because we have, like I think 2019 we had an event every single, like a major LAN event every single week of the year. So
Right.
it's like, even if you were trying to soak up everything and like gatekeep and keep people out, whatever, like there's just so much work to go around. There's like $500,000 of shit cups every 6 months, plus the huge LAN events, then a random Mykonos event that from some angel investor that will never show up again, and just like there's just so much to go around. So that's great. And then you look at Valorant, and they have like very few LAN events a year. Players are complaining about not being able to just compete more often, and then you have also this culture of a rotating door where they're trying to get new talent in and mix them up. So Sean was talking about how they put him on the desk when he didn't even want to do that. And it's like, yeah, I mean, we also have to take accountability, right? Because, when Moses goes to try to coach Team Liquid, that was risky for Moses. I mean, that's
Mm.
not doesn't seem like a fun team to coach, and then it was a really rough time in the 2020 to try to do that, and then it didn't work out. Yanko, same thing. Henry going to be the GM of Cloud9. I mean, it's really cool to watch casters go and try to do other things, but these are also their choices, and I'm really glad they did them first, so I know that I shouldn't do that. It seems like they're pretty terrible jobs, but I I think yeah, everybody needs to recognize that we have agency and accountability for our decisions. And if you wanted to leave CS, you're kind of leaving a place that had a lot to go around. And I think it was true, unfortunately, for DDK. It didn't feel like he was get to a lot of LAN events, but I don't know why exactly. I'm not sure if that had to do with
Right.
him or the TOs.
Do you think TOs should there should be more responsibility on them to accommodate you guys when, as I say, like you feel like you've completed it and you're ready for a new challenge, or is it just a case of that's on you? It's your own responsibility. You find out, because I feel like there's a lot to potentially gain from, say like ESL or something, when Machine's ready to go. Like, he seems like he'd be a very valuable person to have. Like, he they'll know him very well. He'll know the people who work there very well. He's obviously got a good eye for the game, but he's also great at communication. That's part of the job.
Mhm.
Like, and I'm sure he knows production side pretty bloody well at this point. He knows the game side. There's many different ways you can go in as a caster when you built up that kind of knowledge,
Mhm.
So like, I think there's some merit to like them trying to snap them up, instead of, it just seems to be the trend here is they go like retired casters or broadcast talent, they just move on to content creation, fade into irrelevancy sometimes there,
Mhm.
or as you say, like they'll go become a coach or a GM, and that
So for
tends to be pretty bad.
yeah, from the perspective of like the TOs,
Mm,
sometimes it's too expensive. I mean, if you want to take like you want machine or you want sponge, like you gotta pay a lot of money. I
right.
mean, you gotta pay a lot of money, and so if they want to leave, I mean, like if Henry wants to leave and go do something else, he can make more money doing something else. And it's just genuinely hard to answer that monetary question of like, can you keep him
Right.
around to get other things done? And like, yeah, what's the cost benefit analysis of just trying to hire elsewhere, give someone new a shot. Can we just do this? Like, is this even possible? Just can we even afford to do this? And I think that's been a big thing. And there's not a real easy answer around that. And yeah, like Counter Strike is one way. Okay, job stability is something that people talk a lot about in esports. In Counter Strike, I mean, we choose to be freelance. Most of us don't even have agents because we've just built so many relationships with all these TOs over the years, and we are able to jump around from all these different events. And when I say we, I am talking about a short list of like 15 people. Like not many people have have been afforded the ability to do that. But within those 15 people, if those are the valuable ones that you want to keep around, that you don't want to let go coach, BGM, or continue to work in production or with the directors or whatever, yeah, it has to be understood that casting was the easiest way to both have them work at your company and still be happy because they can go and work at every other company as well. So yeah,
Right.
the money question is a really big one there.
Because I've been trying to think, like, even for myself, like I've kind of left journalism now, pretty much left, and I put all my eggs in one basket for years. And then as I started to get sick of it or like ready for something new, I was like, oh, I don't actually know what to do now because I've only done
Mm,
this one thing for so long. So I'm not saying I can relate to like those who have kind of moved on from casting per se, but like I understand where one thing was your passion for so long and you've worked really hard to get good at your craft, and then you're like, oh shit, I have to try and figure something else out. Like
yeah.
it's not too easy. And I mean, like we're coming towards the end of the time, so one thing I did want to ask is, um do you think like sports calling and commentating is very similar to esports? And do you look at sports for inspiration and lessons you can take from? And if so, are there particular sports that you think translate well? Like maybe a UFC will be more applicable than
Yeah.
a English football. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean,
That's
me
for
and
you to
Scrawny are
answer.
huge UFC fans. We'll get him to do a Bruce Buffer impression here and there. I really like NFL casting, and basketball commentary as well. I've thrown like a Mike Bream bang out there every once in a while. Like, sportscasters are a big influence for me for sure.
Okay.
Um, I think on this topic, I think for one thing, for these, I guess, tier two, tier three, whatever new casters that are coming up, something that's I think is really important to remember is that, like, from a technical perspective, the reason why casters don't stand out is because they all fall into similar speech patterns when they start commentating. And I think Maui's a good example of somebody who, when I met him in real life, I was like, man, this guy is hilarious and like really good to be around. And also, whatever, he's now super good on the desk and everything like that. But at first, when I watch him do his YouTube videos or watch him stream or talk on a desk, it was a little bit dry, a little bit too professional, and that's something that we all start with. So, what's really important here is recognizing, what those speech pattern where those speech patterns come from, how to avoid them. And I think there are a couple ways in which casters, uh, they speak in ways that all make them sound very similar in an effort
Hmm.
to be more professional. Leffen had a great quote, and he said on Twitter once, "If you are unprofessional, some will leave, but if you are unentertaining, everyone will leave." And I think trying to find that line is really key for commentators who want to try to stand out. Because if you're super professional, it might sound good, but if somebody knows the next thing that you're going to say, it's not worth listening to. So if you start speaking with a lot of idioms, or you start using, there's an overuse of future forms is a big one, for commentators, where people will say, let's say, for example, Cadian will get the bomb down, Cadian will go to quad, Cadian will get the kill, and all these events already happened. There's something, for
Ah,
some
I see. Yeah.
reason, where commentators will say, we'll speak in a future form in a situation where they should have said, uh, Cadian's taking this fight, Cadian's whatever, and it might set you up in the future for different sentences, but you've already lost who you are by starting to speak like everybody else in that situation in an effort to try and sound more professional. So you've got to find a way to fit your personality into it and not fall into castery way of speaking. Another interesting one is the subject verb inversion of, like, if, let's say, Stewie's running a banana, and so a commentator in just like who's just up and coming will say, rushing up banana is Stewie, you know, turning the corner is Stewie. They'll put Stewie at the end. And that's something that every commentator coming up does. But instead of that, if you could speak more conversationally, Stewie's turning the corner on banana, talking like that, that
Hmm.
would already sound better than most other commentators. For whatever reason, this is something we do. And then on top of all of that, I think overuse of idioms is also a big one, or simple things like saying, oh, we need a pistol. It's 13-2, they need a pistol. These kinds of things, removing those, because again, if someone knows what you're going to say next, there was no point in saying it. So using some dead space, speaking more conversationally, and trying not to fall into the traps of people who are trying to sound too professional are huge for commentators who want to stand out.
That's interesting. So it sounds to me like some people maybe try and imitate other people instead of, like forging out who they are at fear of like, oh, well, I mean, if you're mimicking someone else who's successful, then you'd think in theory, oh, if I just do what they do,
Hmm.
then I'll be like them. When in fact, no, they're where they are because they are who they are, and
Yeah.
that will be the case for you as well. Like so. I just want to say thank you very much for taking the time, mate. That's everything we've got on that front. But if you want to plug anything, now is a good time to do so. So I'll let you plug away.
Watch the RMRs. I'm going to be casting.
Okay, well, this will actually come out later on after that a little bit,
Okay.
so they can go back
Watch
and
the
watch the
Blast Showdown.
VODs.
I'll be casting.
They just plug in the events, but you just launched some apparel, right? Some clothing.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's a 2-day pre-order, so that's over with. But if this,
Ah,
comes out late enough, we're already planning the next release. So in 3 months, there'll be another 2-day pre-order, and I don't want to hear anybody talking about how they missed that one because you had enough warning. Okay.
yeah, this will be out in like I think 2 or 3 weeks, so
Yeah.
it's in a bit of a weird spot. So they know
Yeah.
to look forward to the next one.
Yeah.
All right, and obviously go follow him on Twitter. Very good follow there. And thank you again for taking the time, mate. And thank you for everyone watching at home or in the office, I suppose. And we'll catch you on the next episode. Cheers.